Hi there, I'm Deep Dillon. Welcome to your AI Injection, the podcast where we discuss state-of-the-art techniques in artificial intelligence with a focus on how these capabilities are used to transform organizations, making them more efficient, impactful, and successful. Welcome. We got a bunch of Xyonixians here. Carsten and Bill, who you all have heard from before, and Andy's here. He's new to the podcast, but not new to Xionics by any means. So why don't we get started a little bit? Today's topic, we're going to really be digging in on this concept of a virtual concierge, and I'm gonna start by just kind of describing some actual human concierges, because I don't know that everybody has interacted with one, but I mean, the one that most people probably know of is, of course, the hotel concierge. And so all of us have probably been in a hotel. And I remember I had just graduated and got my first real job and stayed in my first like fancy hotel. And I had a friend with me, and they're like, why don't you just ask the concierge? And I was thinking, well, who's that? And so I go up and I talk to this person who had like very well manicured nails and was just this very, distinguished gentleman who knew everything about everything. And I thought, wow, that was cool. So hotel concierge is one. A couple of other ones, everybody's seen a movie with the fancy apartment building in New York that's got, the concierge that does all kinds of stuff for you, from organizing events to coordinating deliveries, maybe even, helping you with your housekeeping services or whatever. We're seeing this concept in healthcare, a lot more, where you've got like personalized assistance to patients and maybe their families, helping with medical facilities, transportation, lodging, and meals. So, you see it in cruise ships, in retail, airlines, events, fancy clubs in LA have these folks. And I think the one thing that, everyone thinks about is it's somebody who really knows a lot. They're lovely conversationalists, but they're also able to perform actions for you. So they're not just talking, but they're often able to like make things happen. Most recently, I was in a nice hotel in Delhi, and I thought it was kind of random because like when you fly into India, usually your SIM cards don't work that great, and it's just not worth the effort of having a foreign SIM card. So I got some for me and the family at the airport, and it was just a complete mess to get these things activated because we flew in at like 2 or 3 in the morning. I'm like, whatever, we'll figure it out the next day. So a bunch of us are pretty tech nerdy. We're like, what the heck? We cannot get these things activated. So then I thought, I'm just going to ask the concierge. Go down there. He's like, oh, yes, no problem. Here, blah, 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 blah. He's like, just leave your stuff with me. I'll figure it out. And then so we're like, okay, fine, whatever. Messes around, figures it out, gets it all done, hands them back. So that's the topic today. Is we've got this new ChatGPT-like stuff that we've kind of talked about a bunch in the podcast. We've got this, so we've got this capability to handle the highly conversational part. What do we think about this idea of the concierge in general and, the future of it in technology? So I'm going to just kind of leave it there and let somebody jump in.
So my first question is, like, you go to the concierge when you got to the hotel, right? Why didn't you just Google what you wanted to know?
You've never been to India. So
well, it's more of a general question, right? So let's say you're not in India. Let's say you're in the US, where you can actually really just Google something. Like, I'm in the hotel, I don't find the restaurant.
I think the main reason you don't, I mean, like, I don't know. It's a great question. Is like, when do you use a concierge versus like seeking it out and solving the problem yourself? I think that's the meta question, right?
Right, because that will tell us what is the difference between that, right? Between this like completely computerized automated answering service that is unpersonalized and just gives you like some objective answer to the search, and like a concierge. So before we figure out how to build a virtual one, we have to figure out what it offers above that, right?
I think or just why people use it. Yeah. So what do you all think?
I think there's a couple different dimensions to it, and one is curation, right? So if you're a business person, you're heading somewhere, you want to figure out somewhere to go to lunch, you don't want to sit down and research all the restaurants in Manhattan or whatever. You just talk to someone who already, Deep has made this point before, that they can take a look at you and maybe get a good idea what kind of recommendations they can make, and very quickly draw from their banks of curation. On the technical side of the SIM card thing, you and I might be inclined to figure that out ourselves. I think a lot of people probably won't. And if they can get help with something and not worry about it, they're going to be happy with that as well.
So
Right.
convenience seems to be like a key driver.
I was going to say the number one thing when you think about you, and all of us here are very technically savvy. When I think about some of the folks that I know a bit older and not so technically savvy, it certainly comes down to convenience. And maybe a form of communication that they're more used to, actually talking with a real human being. And so that's the other thing about these, I would say, as almost like a qualitative note, that these concierges that we create virtually, they're probably going to have to be designed to be effective in a way that facilitates different forms of communication, the style of communication that people are used to.
And I think the curation that Andy mentioned is really important, and that's kind of like why we currently see search engines fretting about this new technology, because you can actually execute your search, let's call it search, in something like GPT by asking a question, and it does like the sifting through the results and the consolidation to you to give you like one precise answer. Now that can be good, sometimes that's bad, but it's convenience, that's for sure. When I go to a concierge, especially in a hotel, right, there needs to be a certain level of like personal skills, right? There needs to be empathy. I want kind of like I ask him, and typically I get an answer back. Well, what do you like? What kind of food do you like? And so you build like this personal relationship with your concierge, and then what you're looking for, if there's a match there, is that person's personal recommendation. So I feel like that individualized, or that person's personality comes through in the recommendations they give you sometimes.
Yeah. So what I'm hearing is like two things. One is like convenience, which we covered. Carson's talking about here. I'm sort of reading as personalization, like a heavily personalized rendering.
I was going to make a related point that someone who a hotel is going to hire as a concierge is going to have a very high degree of social acuity and skills. They're really going to put a new stranger talking to them at ease, navigate the conversation very smoothly, show interest in the person. I think it's a pretty high bar for social interaction, actually.
And just as an example, let's say you go to a hotel and there's 3 different concierges, right? One is an older gentleman, the other one is a young woman, and the middle one is kind of like a middle-aged man with a fishing hat on, right? And I want to know where to go fishing. Which of the 3 am I going to ask?
If you feel that you have some sort of camaraderie with someone in some way, shape, or form, you do trust them a bit more, and you're more open to their suggestions.
Yes. It's not necessarily trust, but alignment between what you're looking for and what you think that other person, is also.
But
like,
sometimes it's
represents.
definitely trust. Like, so like the example when I'm in Delhi, trust is a huge factor. If I want a cab or a driver, I trust that like this high-end hotel has vetted the drivers. That's maybe less of an issue. Or if you're going to
hand over 4 phones.
Yeah, that's less of an issue, I think in a lot of the West, but it's a huge issue if you're flying into like, other places that have high crime rates or whatever. Even in the West, like, we've got plenty of cities that are anything close to safe. So
I was going to ask you earlier, did you still have money in your bank account after you left your phone there?
I did. But that's where the trust is massive, because
it's important. Yes.
This exact hotel, like, this is a bit of a side, but like a few years ago, maybe 10 years ago, we were there. And my wife, they have safes in the room, and my wife had left like, I don't know, 5-10 grand worth of jewelry in the safe, and totally forgot about it. And then we went about, and like maybe a month later, she's like, oh my God, I think I left my jewelry in the safe at the hotel. She calls them up and they're like, oh, no problem, madam. Your stuff is, it's perfectly fine. Next time when you come through on your way out, just, we'll have it all for you. And, fast forward 15 years later, I think it's been quite a while. We never go to any other hotel in Delhi, but Le Méridien. I'm going to tell it to the world because it's an amazing hotel. It's like this French hotel in Delhi. That's just awesome. But that trust is huge. So I'm hearing like personality, I don't know, empathy/social connection or something. Convenience is one.
I wanted to make a comment here, Deep, about something that Carsten had said. I agree with him wholeheartedly. In terms of people I communicate with at hotels, I was recently in Hawaii, and I absolutely avoided the person that was at the desk after hearing them speak, because I knew they weren't going to give me really the information that I truly wanted. What these virtual concierges have in their advantage is actually taking on different personas for different people. You know, you can have multiple personalities built into this thing.
How do they know which one they should take on, right? You
Right.
know,
This is all the game of detection.
they have
you
to
know?
ask. And how do they ask politely?
Yeah, so we could talk about that, but you could have the user sort of select the style they like, or you could try to infer the style.
Humans determine that kind of like how they're approached. You read a person, right? So if you're the
Well, yeah, you've got
concierge,
clothing, like you
Yes.
mentioned with the fishing
Exactly.
hat, right? Like, and
Exactly.
how somebody's just kind of speaking to you and interacting. And maybe even before they say a word, there's a lot of social cue reading that they do.
There's way more context in the first interaction, but you can imagine if a hotel chain or another business implemented a concierge service, maybe you have a business traveler who stayed in that hotel 100 times before. You have a lot of context about that person and what they've asked for in the past and what they need.
That's right.
That the person in the Chicago Hilton isn't going to have when they walk up. So it's different context.
I mean, the best thing would be you just sign up with your Facebook ID, right? And then they know everything about you anyway in the first place. But it's a different story. Basically, you have to make that analysis that everybody online on the web is trying to make about you. Like, who are you? What are you interested in? And you would have to make that as the introduction to your interaction with the agent, because it plays a role in how you interact with that person.
What about the visual aspects? So, we've got a number of new, really powerful capabilities coming out in the machine learning world, from the ability to create a quote avatar with your, like, a really realistic sound version of your voice. You've got, the ability to like make a pretty darn good kind of look and feel around you. I don't know if you all have seen Synthesia, but their tools are pretty amazing. What do we think is the role of this kind of voice and image capability in like future virtual concierge services?
So one of the things that I'd like to talk about here is a concierge in terms of health, and particularly in mental health. There was a study done not long ago in the military for soldiers who had PTSD, and they were interfacing with a counselor / psychologist sitting on the other side, of the conversation in a remote room, maybe even in a remote part of the country, whatever. But instead of having a face-to-face conversation, which we're having right now, they actually had a digital characterization of that psychologist. I mean, for all we know, that that soldier was talking to a giraffe, cartoon version of that psychologist or whatever. But what they found is that the soldiers were much more open to sharing very personal information because they felt, number one, less judged, and they felt a certain sense of anonymity and freedom to explore those kind of very sensitive topics. So I think that these virtual concierges that have this visual form, in some ways, it helps people to feel more relaxed and open up. They don't necessarily feel as judged as they would be maybe in face-to-face with a real human. That's a very interesting aspect of all of this. I would say conversely, though, that we as humans are very judgmental about images, more so than we are about, say, text or something. If we see distortions in these images or these digital characterizations, I mean, it drives me crazy. I think it's easy for me to pick up on, and I don't know if I would be so happy to interact with something like that.
Bill, do you have any further context about what the soldiers were looking at? You mentioned giraffes, but was it like a cartoon image?
They really weren't. They really weren't looking at giraffes. They were just looking at like an avatar of the psychologist. And actually, I think in some cases they were given a choice of the type of avatar that they would prefer. Very much like we were talking about, what's the type, like Carsten alluded to, what are the different types of concierges that he might approach for different types of information. And this was, these people got to say, hey, I want somebody who looks like a military man because they know what's going on in the field, as opposed to just some guy with a bow tie who's never touched a weapon or been in combat. Sort of simple psychological things. I think it's actually going to have an incredible impact. The visual aspect will have an incredible impact, but I also think that we're very, very picky as human beings. So it's got to be good.
Yeah, I think I would agree with that. I mean, the first thing you eliminate is kind of like bias, right? Because in any human interaction, the first thing we do is we see somebody based on their appearance. We have certain perception of them, right? Can be good, can be bad, can build trust, can do the opposite. And I think you eliminate that if you have like a more neutral, more standardized appearance, right? The second thing is trust, of course. People are kind of hesitant to share their personal feelings, emotions, problems with like a random person because they're also afraid of bias. They wonder, what does that person think of me? What does he do? Does he walk out of the room and laugh about it? And so we see that people have much more open and honest conversations with electronic agents and computer programs. And it's not just like in a visual scenario, also like chatting with a chatbot, than they would with another human being, because that, exactly like you said, that feeling of being judged goes away. They really, the perception is there that the machines are way more objective, and they are. They don't have an opinion. They just have rules, basically.
Coming from the person who said that by definition they're biased.
Well, yeah, and so that's actually something else I want to say. If you reverse it, because we started this conversation by saying that the concierge must have like an opinion of the person that is interacting with them in order to personalize their interactions, right? If you would reverse that and say there's a camera recording the person that is talking to the concierge, and you kind of try to judge their personality based on their appearance, well, then you're in bias hellland, right?
Well, you're in bias no matter what. No matter what, all these models are going to inherit the bias of their training data.
The concierge, a human concierge, is potentially problematic in that regard, that they're looking at someone being like, oh, this looks like a successful business person. Oh, this person looks like a casual traveler. Well, maybe the casual traveler is a, person of color who's a, crypto billionaire. Who the hell knows, right? But they are making a judgment.
But that's what makes us human and makes us like talking to a concierge. Because usually what happens is you walk up to the concierge, they have a first impression of you. That's how they greet you. Then within the first couple of minutes of your conversation, they might actually, if they're a good concierge, figure out, that, and he's just, he's looking for this. And so when you ask you for a recommendation, then you base your recommendation on your perceived personality impression from that person after a bit of conversation. And it changes all the time.
I mean, it's also in their job description. If they're like really judgy and they're not going to make for a great concierge. Like, part of what makes them sort of good at what they do is their ability to connect with anyone and help that person feel heard, and also know a bunch and tailor their responses.
Need help with computer vision, natural language processing, automated content creation, conversational understanding, time series forecasting, customer behavior analytics? Reach out to us at Xyonix.com. That's Xyonix.com. Maybe we can help.
I want to make a comment about, Carsten, about what you said earlier on about empathy. If you think about the concierge in a medical clinic, when I walk up to check in, I'm usually greeted by people who are overworked, very tired. They always have to wrestle with things they don't really particularly like computers and insurance information and blah, blah, blah. And really, the visual vibe of that conversation really sucks. I mean, I don't feel very cared for or respected. I don't feel like I'm getting a lot of empathy, even though I might be feeling terrible at the moment. Here, again, we have the opportunity with these virtual assistants or virtual concierges to change that game completely. So I think of more of it as a positive thing.
So in a way,
I'd rather talk to them than some of these people that I've talked to in the past.
That here's a real question, right? It's like, even if you talk to a human, there can be real empathy and there can be fake empathy. That human can not give a damn about you and still like react with you or interact with you as if they're empathetic to your problems, right? Sometimes you feel that. With a bot, it's always that way. A bot doesn't have any empathy, even though the way it acts with you kind of might pretend to be that. I honestly don't think that with any kind of virtual thing, we can get that emotional empathy that we're looking for here. But we don't need it, right? For the concierge.
I don't know. I mean, like, if that were true, then an actor or actress would be incapable of moving you, but they can. Like, when you see an actress or an actor faking it, if they're really darn good at what they do, you will feel whatever it is they're trying to get you to feel.
Yeah,
so
but
I feel like you can
real.
get bots to fake it. I mean, we'll get good at that one day.
I don't think so, because it's never real.
Yeah.
Well, I think that's true, but that sort of presumes that humans are not capable of being deluded. I mean,
I might say that what I'm probably looking for in that experience is not that they necessarily have tons of empathy for me and that I feel like I have sunshine blowing out my ears after I talk to them, but I absolutely don't want a negative experience. And I usually get a negative experience from these people.
Maybe also empathy is the wrong word for like a virtual concierge or a chatbot. I think like reading your personality is the important thing and acting accordingly, right? Because you're asking them about recommendations, and recommendations should fit what you are looking for. And that is different from person to person. In order to give you a good recommendation about what movie to watch, I need to know what the heck you like in movies.
Yeah, and that's, good conversationalists do that all the time. Like if somebody asks you, hey, what shows should I go check out? I mean, obviously my first thing is like, well, what kind of music are you into? Because I can recommend some stuff you will absolutely hate. And I may be able to recommend something that you'll actually love, but I can't know that unless I know a little about you. So I want to shift the conversation a little bit. So it's April, I don't know, what is it? April 2023. Like why are we having this conversation today? Like what is different today, technologically speaking? And let's kind of geek out for a little bit. What are some of the raw ingredients or tooling that's now available in 2023 that makes it even feasible to imagine a really sophisticated virtual concierge, whether it's working in an airline or a ship or a hotel or a residential or healthcare or whatever. But what is it that makes this stuff so much easier and more feasible to get to like a new level of capability than we've sort of seen in the past?
Deep, I have a little story to add for context to lead in. In my research for this, I found that IBM Watson had done a robot for Hilton, I believe, back in 2016, which looked like a little short version of Asimo that would stand on top of the desktop and was supposed to be making literally was a robot concierge that was supposed to be making calls in the back end to the Watson API to do speech to text, but also was intended to be a conversational agent. And obviously, the history of AI agents goes way back before that. Connie was her name, didn't take off the Watson Hilton robot. And so it's great framing of like what is different today. And obviously ChatGPT is a big part of what we're experiencing that feels different. Right?
For me, Andy, I appreciate that sort of historical view because this has been coming around for a long time. I mean, we even can think about this in terms of Star Trek or any sci-fi show we've seen where they're talking to a computer screen or something to help them out in setting phasers or whatever they're going to be doing. I would say, personally, the day that I got access to GPT-4 was a day I'm always going to remember. I really do feel it's changed my life, how I actually work. There isn't a day that goes by since then that I haven't used ChatGPT or from OpenAI or GPT-4 to do some aspect of my job. One of the reasons why is it's become something that's migrated from like an entertainment tool or something that's kind of fascinating to something actually useful. Conversations that you have at ChatGPT seem more natural. They seem to be more constrained. They're not hallucinating as much. They seem to be very relevant. They seem to be picking up almost on my personality. So just in terms, it's hard to sometimes quantify that, but to qualify it as the conversation seems a lot more natural with these large language models now and wrapped into these conversational bots. They are fascinating and they're working. And now the whole world's turned on to them. And we talked about this stuff a year and a half ago. Now the whole world is turned on to them and using them. The whole game has changed. Now it's a matter of trust.
It also goes beyond conversation, right? Like conversation's important, but it's not everything it takes to get to a concierge level. So what else is going on besides conversational capability? Because I totally agree that the LLMs and the reinforcement layer on top is having a profound difference in our ability to talk to these things. But like, what other capabilities beyond conversation, are sort of relevant here? Because it feels like there's a lot of movements in other areas. Like, voice rec is at a whole new level now due to advances there. This ability to like have my voice synthesized, and create like a realistic avatar experience. That's something that we couldn't do a couple of years ago at a reasonable cost point. And then there's just all of this like ability to take actions. There's just like the overall API world where you've got so many businesses and restaurant, like the ability to like book a restaurant. There's platforms to jump in and grab an API endpoint and actually close the reservation, which maybe 12 years ago you couldn't do. All this stuff seems like it's converging to make this kind of vision possible.
aside from being a more conversational interface and doing like one aspect that I think is good for search, and we elaborated on that earlier, which is the consolidation, right? It really kind of like zeroes in on your question and prevents you, removes the necessity of going through like source material yourself to find the solution, which has positive and negative aspects. I'd like to ask the question, what do you think is enabled by it that was not possible before if we disregard the more human interface and the convenience kind of like that it offers?
So I think one answer to that is to take it a little bit away from our world, which is highly technical and involved in AI. I mean, we just have pretty fancy.
General for the world.
I would answer that question in how my children reacted to this technology and how my wife did. I think they were blown away by its ability to bootstrap and generate creative content for them that they could then iterate on. So
good point.
Really is a matter of
generative content.
You know, I think there's part of it is that you and I say, if we're asking it to do, say, generate a program, well, we're very, very experienced in the language that we're asking it to generate. So we can be very sort of critical of that output. But for someone who's writing a paper for the first time, or maybe a business plan for the first time, or, you know, sort of doing something in an introductory way, even if they're an expert, they still are going to use this tool to bootstrap their work and get a lot of stuff done. I mean, I think it's just getting better and better.
What do you think this technology enables virtual agents to do that was not possible with virtual agents before?
Obviously, I think the conversational aspect is huge, and it's so good at so many things. I mean,
we've all had the experience of going through a phone prompt customer service thing where it's like, state your problem, and then it's just like so canned and painful to go through that interaction. You're not going to do that if you want a restaurant recommendation and you're on your way out of the hotel. So having something that is conversational, that feels rewarding to speak to, that feels like it has creative and customized recommendations, even if it's not really creative, it's really collaborative filtering or something under there. I think that makes a big difference.
It feels more human-like. The interaction becomes more human-like, more what we're used to, less canned, less mechanical.
I mean, I use it for everything, like Bill. Everything, even proposals that I send out. I mean, before it would maybe take me 3 hours to write a proposal. Now it takes me 15 minutes. I go back and forth. I prompt. I get a bunch of stuff. I like edit it. Obviously, I don't send out something like that without editing it. That'd be asinine. But but it deals with the blank slate problem.
Specifically for the chatbots, I agree with the more human interaction part of it, and that possibly enables it to be applied to customer interactions where previously you didn't want to or shouldn't use a chatbot, right? There's one problem with it, though, that we can all agree on that one. It's really good at talking about anything you ask it, but how do you actually corral it to like be specific to a domain and have expert knowledge within that domain?
This is the key. This is what's our biggest challenge. We all listened to a recent interview, Jeffrey Hinton, you know, sort of this godfather of AI, and he viewed these LLMs as idiot savants. You know, they're going to kill you in the local pub trivia competition, but you know, really, they don't have the ability to reason like we do as humans. We have a lot less knowledge, actually, and a lot less training they do, and they have this vast, literally trained on almost the world's worth of information at their fingertips. So I think that we're going to spend a lot of our time, you know, at Xyonics and with customers in the future in developing so-called custom models, where a base model of an LLM is used to train these customized models to do very, very specific tasks very, very well. And maybe even do, you know, various aspects of things like better sentiment analysis detector, better data retrieval, better blah, blah, blah. I mean, there's going to be...
One of the things that I'm seeing, Bill, to riff on that a little bit, is it's both frightening and amazing, is like the stuff that people are doing with this auto GPT idea. So they're giving it like really high level goals, like get me a pizza. And then the system is sort of breaking it down and figuring out like, hey, where are some pizza joints? Like, you know, where are some pizza joints? Okay, how do I actually make a phone call or book something online? It's like a multiple sequence of asking, thinking, action coordination, going out and committing an action. So you have to you have
and
a
for
goal,
anybody
you
who
have
hasn't seen
sub-goals.
that, it's set up as, at least the demo that I saw, is set up as like a browser plugin. So it has the ability to load websites, click on stuff, fill in form data, that sort of thing. So the interface is creating these steps and then actually taking these actions on a user's machine without the user intervening within those steps, which brings up a lot of interesting questions and concerns.
And it's also leaning on ChatGPT 4 for the brain part, like for the
Right.
thinking part. And that's the part that's fascinating and frightening simultaneously.
Well, it's also the problem, right? ChatGPT is very good at content generation, and it has developed some sort of abilities of, well, maybe it's reasoning. It generates text. You still have to convert that text to specific actions you should take, right? And that's like one aspect that you need to do even for a chatbot or a concierge service, because
Well, that's the part that's fascinating, is that it's doing that. Like the auto GPT process is formulating the prompts, it's going through and formulating the list of actions,
Because-
figuring it. Yeah.
because it has rule engines that are written in there that trigger on certain things ChatGPT says that then execute these actions, right? And so you have to come
execute
up with
the action of clicking on a button or filling in a form or something like that. But
Exactly.
we could get really good at writing those actions. I don't think that's a big stumbling block.
The real challenge is control.
Yes,
Because
agreed.
not just do you have to make the judgment call that what it does is meaningful and not wrong, you also have business constraints. You don't want the concierge at the Marriott to tell you should really not rent a room here, go to the Hilton. So business constraints and taking action are like the biggest challenges of interpreting the output of ChatGPT. And then the fact that, of course, it has a mind of its own. We don't control it. We actually do not know why it's reasoning the way it's reasoning. And we have very limited ways to actually control that. And I think these are the biggest hurdles that we're still facing before we can make that reality that we're just talking about, that we see some glimpses of technology, make it a reality.
And in terms of control, like the concierge at the Marriott is going to have an internal control that kicks in before they order you 1,000 pizzas. They're going to be like, wait a minute. But Auto GPT, I'm not so sure.
Well, and I think that's part of the process of building a product, right? Like if you're building a product that relies on this ability to have more agent-like behavior, then you're not going to start off with an unlimited AWS budget. You're not going to start off like you're going to put it in a box. Like we're able to put things in boxes and incrementally scale up our experimentation. Like we're not going to start off with the moon and design like a stock trading system that goes back and forth for ChatGPT, asks it for some code, runs the code, makes the decision, and then just like trades on like an exponentially rapidly increasing budget. Like that's not going to happen without human.
But honestly, I want you to be honest. If you were to set aside a couple $100 and have it go just crazy, I would be totally up for that experiment. Like,
let's do it.
It's called gambling. It's entertainment.
Yeah.
When I looked at, for example, Microsoft has their Office suite of tools, and it's called, I think, Copilot, where they've integrated basically, GPT-4 along with these products. And my mouth dropped open because the stuff that they're going to be putting out is so amazing. Now, it's a little bit annoying to me that it really corrals you in this world. They really reinforce in their advertising of these products how you as an individual have control. But you really have control in this corral that they've built for you. And I have to say, people will use those things because they're very, very convenient. I personally wouldn't want to write my daughter's graduation speech, have it done automatically by GPT or some chatbot, but you might do that because it's.
Are you kidding? I would immediately start there.
So
I never write anything anymore without starting.
I want to make one more point in general, is that now we've given access to tools that can be actionable. They can order pizzas. They can pull up graphics. They can do stuff for us. It's super dangerous, but if controlled and sort of bled out, it might be super convenient. Super powerful, super convenient.
Also, please unbiased, right?
We already have the big players all have their own. Bard is already out. I've started using it a lot more just because OpenAI's ChatGPT is often blocked. So at a minimum, you're going to have an oligarchy of these. But then you have all of the private renderings where folks who have very secure private data but want to build kind of concierge like services like this or chat services, they on very sensitive data are going to have to like fine tune and tailor those models. So I feel like we're going towards an ecosystem more than central only. And I agree it's getting a lot harder because those systems are so much more expensive to run now than where we were 2 years ago. But I think it's unlikely that we're going to have like one unit. I think if there's zero chance we're going to have one unified situation, it's likely that we might wind up with a de facto oligarchy of them, of the big tech companies.
Well, but also it's kind of like, sure, there's more than one, but at the end of the day, great. The LLMs of the world controlled by the tech industry. The tech industry has its own, as an entity, has its own opinions, et cetera, et cetera. They decide what they feed into those models, and the content that is generated is extracted from that. So that completely controls what comes out of it and how these models are thinking. Sure, there's more than one, but it still takes millions of dollars to build and run them.
I mean, I agree that it's
there.
frightening, but is it that much more frightening than the fact that they already control how we talk to each other? I mean, the same companies control exactly how we communicate with social media. And I guess it is, I mean, to your point, it's frightening because we almost like, we've brought down democracies. Like we have all kinds of problems with social media. And I feel like we're just getting started with AI.
Yeah, look at it. I mean, for example, again, we're getting sidetracked, but for example, the last election, we had to spend thousands and thousands of dollars to hire all those people in Eastern Europe to write these fake Facebook things, right? Now we don't have to do that anymore. We have ChatGPT to generate all that fake political information for us. And I don't think we'll face that in the virtual concierge business at all, right? That's a more outlying. I just mentioned that because Bill said how great it is at generating content. And I think there's a danger in that if you suddenly let these models think for you instead of thinking yourself. But in these highly personalized virtual concierge scenarios, all that goes away. There's no problem anymore. We just love the ability to generate language and act on a more human level. But here we have the problem of that control that we hate in the generic sense for content generation, and it's bad because it's biased. In this isolated worlds, we want to be extremely biased. We want to be super biased because now these are little business applications. They are supposed to represent my business rules. And so what we don't want in the big scenario, we need to have in the extreme in the small virtual concierge world.
Have data, have a hypothesis on some high-value insights that, if extracted automatically, could transform your business. Not sure how to proceed? Bounce your ideas off one of our data scientists with a free consult. Reach out at Xyonics.com. You'll talk to an expert, not a salesperson.
Let's talk about that a little bit. So let's talk about some of these chatbot platforms, that you can use that have not just conversational modifications, but the ability to like take your conversation out into different vectors like Slack and other places. They have the ability to like wrap actions up. And so this is like tools like Rasa and BotPress and Dialogflow. And then you have like Google and Microsoft and others that have their home assistants and their paradigm of like how to build applications in this kind of chatty world. Like, what are we seeing? Like, how are we seeing these platforms evolve in the last, maybe year or so that's different from maybe 10 years ago when they got started and they were just bad at parsing like multiple choice answers. Like there was all kinds of problems with them before. Like how are we seeing these platforms helping us realize this virtual concierge vision or not?
I think we're involving. All these different platforms come out with their own or creative approaches of how to domain constrain these large language models. We see them try to basically fine-tune them on corpora so that their answers are more like the conversations they would want them to have. I mean, ChatGPT did that, right? It came out of GPT with human feedback. We see them putting like really hard constraints on there with a knowledge base behind it, where we try to corral them to only answer if the content is actually found in the knowledge base. And we have come up with really sophisticated tricks of like feeding the knowledge base using semantic search back into the models and tell them to constrain it, because the models are still one-shot models. They have no memory. They have no real history. Even if it makes you think that when you interact with ChatGPT, every single request to these models sends one block of context in. And based on that one limited block of context, it generates its response, right? I'm not sure where we're going from here. I think these approaches will become more sophisticated. People will come up with new ideas to do this. I think people will work on actually having memory for these models. So that's kind of like where we're currently at.
Andy, what do you think? I know you spent some time with some of these platforms.
Well, I mean, I think the bar is way higher for a lot of, anyone who has a customer service interface that's a chat on their website or whatever. They're going to need to have a much higher quality of interaction in order to compete in that space. I do think the challenge of keeping them on topic, if you have a business that, you need to kind of keep them within the knowledge base that you have, is a big one. as we've seen in some of our work. But I think it's a space that's moving quickly, and we're going to see more and more agents in different aspects of our software interactions.
So let's say you're changing the topic slightly. Let's say you guys want to talk directly to the product managers out there who maybe have products that are doing all kinds of stuff, like totally different things that maybe they've never even thought about this virtual concierge concept. Like, what might you say to them in terms of how to think about whether or not these sorts of capabilities make sense in their products, and if they do, like how to go about shaking a tree and figuring out how to take the first steps?
I would think about what interactions your customers have with the product today. Do they essentially need training that you can't afford to supply from a human training force? If that's the case, because maybe you have a complex user interface in your product or whatever, then an agent like this could provide a relatively low cost lift to get training out to people. That's maybe one dimension to look at. People interacting with your existing low-tech chatbot and then quitting after a couple of interactions. Are they achieving their goals? Improvements could be made there likely.
I imagine there's hundreds or thousands of companies where executives are screaming at their teams who have these dumb chatbots on their website saying, "Hey, I use ChatGPT 4 and it's amazing, and our stuff stinks. What help fix it?" And then they're like, "But we have private data, but we can't just send all of our stuff over to this external party, but we don't even know how these things work." There's I think there's going to be a ton of action there. Bill, what are your thoughts on this?
Yeah, speaking about this from sort of a technical perspective, I would think if I was a product manager and trying to implement one of these things, I would be very jealous of GTP4 and ChatGPT right now. First of all, as we all know, we don't know what the heck is going on behind the scenes. We have a sense of what is going on. We know that ChatGPT, for example, is comprised of multiple models, and it combines the responses from multiple models to give you an appropriate response whenever it interacts with you. It's taken into account your history in that chat session. It's somehow being summarized, etc. So, but it's working. What they're doing is working. It's got people involved. It's got people excited. And if I'm a product manager sitting out there, it's like, man, I want to have something like that for my company. But there are some barriers that we've already discussed. There's one of the issue of trust. There's one of keeping these things on the rails. And do I want to pay giant corporation X, Y, or Z to be able to accomplish those things? So there are some technical hurdles, I think, like, for example, not to sell Xyonics, but there is this idea of doing customization, and sometimes it's referred to as fine tuning, where you literally can go to God, you can go to GTP4 and have it create exactly the type of interactions that you want. And you can use that data for training so-called lower level models. And those lower level models could be proprietary, but they're much cheaper and they're much faster, or they could even be something that's based on an open source model. So you can, we're always going to wrestle with this idea of containing these things.
Yeah.
But you can at least address this idea of data privacy. You can lock it down into your own company. You can talk about how are we going to make this faster, how are we going to make it cheaper, because I really don't want to,
you don't have to send all your customer data to some third party if you don't want
some
to.
third party, right? Exactly.
Sure.
But I also think that speaks to the customization and personalization aspects of this. I think there's just going to be an explosion, as we've talked about in terms of like a concierge, the types of conversations that people feel comfortable with, and those types of conversations, if they're comfortable, people are going to come back. They're going to want to maybe interact with that chatbot even, or talk to. I think the more comfortable it gets, the better. It's certainly more risky because we're opening ourselves up to worlds that we, it's a level of trust. But I think that's going to be a huge concern going forward.
Have you ever used a chat interface in an app and enjoyed it? There's a real opportunity here. If you have a customized assistant within the Marriott app or whatever, the Win app that is consistently helping you out, that it could be a differentiator for that business. Or, at some point, it's probably maybe they all have a pretty good one, but the one that you've been using has your history and it makes that customer more sticky. So I think it's worth investing in the concierge space.
Just to wrap that up,
Sure.
I'm very data driven. So my first question would be, why do you want a virtual concierge, right? What problems do you think the virtual concierge could help you with? That kind of requires data, right? So if you have the idea of putting a chatbot on your webpage, measure demand first. Would people actually use it? And also learn a little bit about the interactions that people would have with it. What do you want it to answer? What problems do you think it can solve? And then I think it also depends on the ratio of what is the complexity of those interactions you anticipate people to have with your chatbot, right? And if you have a high ratio of trivial things that you think a virtual concierge could automatically answer with security and safety, it's great.
Let's fast forward 5 to 10 years out. All your greatest fears or desires have been fulfilled with this virtual concierge concept. Everything you're looking at with respect to technological evolution, give us your best 3 to 5 sentence rendering of the future and what it looks like with respect to this concept of the virtual concierge.
I'd like to kick that off. I wake up in the morning, I'm going to brush my teeth. I talk to the mirror. Hey, man, how's it going today? Hey, how are you doing? Doing great. Boy, I sure miss my kids. They're at college. What can you load up the Constantine Kid chatbot? I want to have a little conversation with them, get that experience. And oh gosh, I would really need to order some food today. What do you think? Yeah, that sounds good. What would you like to order? Okay, well, let's do that. By the way, Bill, I've noticed that you haven't been running a lot lately. How about I schedule some time in your schedule to go running? Okay, that would be great. Thank you, man. I really appreciate it. Okay, I got to go now. I'm going to go talk to my toaster. I don't need that sentence. I really do think that world is actually coming, whether we like it or not. And I also think it could be very fun.
Bill did a good job illustrating the kind of some of the maybe good things. I'll probably take more of a negative view here, because I think we would be remiss in this conversation not to bring up the replacement of human labor with the concierge, not only in a hotel concierge scenario, but potentially in lots of different spaces where you have customer service tasks that are kind of rote and very repeatable. The complexity of the interactions is not high. So we could see the chatbots replacing a lot of human jobs in this kind of space. And our interactions maybe are with these AI bots, which also maybe funnel a lot of the commerce to big business and are less likely to be connected to local businesses and things like that. Hopefully the labor finds more rewarding jobs anyway, but I think that's a larger societal question that we'd save for another podcast. So
I feel like there's a good potential future outcome, a moderate potential future outcome, and a downright horrific potential future outcome. I don't know exactly which ones are going to play out, but I would say, as far as what I think is definitely going to happen, what you're describing, that capability is going to be built by just about everyone under the sun. Like, we are going to be having more conversational interactions with things that just do a lot more for us. And even if it's not conversational, that other parts of it are still going to happen. I think it's going to most likely be visual. When I look at companies like Synthesia and the rate at which they're growing and the costs being driven down, people are going to be able to take texty stuff, put it in, have this great avatar 3D rendered thing talk back to you. I think as much as we might love or hate that, it's going to be both. We're going to have these bots. We're going to be interacting with them in a very sci-fi, feature-y sort of way. And I think the most common thing will be to swear at them at the same time. I mean, if you're an engineer behind the scenes at Amazon or Google, looking at Alexa or Google Home, I mean, people treat their bots terribly, and that stuff's also going to happen. But at the same time, I think we're going to go from a world where you use your Alexa to check the weather and play music to a world where you're using those things to do a lot more, like quite a bit more. And
I think we have a visionary at Xyonics. His name is David, and he has a flip phone.
No, he sold it, or he lost. He finally got shut off by the cell phone company. He had a 2G phone, for our audience's sake. It's this little tiny.
It was 3G actually. They finally shut off the 3G that it was using.
Oh, yeah. I thought it was 2G. Oh, okay.
Yeah.
So they finally shut him off, and then didn't they send him a free phone? They said, just to get you off our network.
They gave him a deal
man.
He couldn't refuse. They gave him a smartphone for $50, or maybe it was free or something. Yeah,
that's how they get
David's my man. I mean, he can actually fix his own car. Imagine that. You don't have to go through a computer.
He replaced his car's automatic transmission with a manual one. So He doesn't need a bot to do too many things, I guess.
All right, everyone. Thanks for coming on.
By the way, I
Okay.
just want to say this is not real Bill. This is virtual Bill, and you've all been fooled.
That's all for this episode. I'm Deep Dylan, your host, saying check back soon for your next AI injection. In the meantime, if you need help injecting AI into your business, reach out to us at Xyonix.com. That's Xyonix.com. Whether it's text, audio, video, or other business data, we help all kinds of organizations like yours automatically find and operationalize transformative insights.